So I have been a Sony shooter for a few years. My first ever camera was a Nikon. I quickly moved on from that and I had a Panasonic Lumix G3. It was a micro four thirds camera primarily for photos. I had it with me every time and I was always taking pictures with it. But at some point I needed to upgrade. I started making YouTube videos, so I moved to Sony and I bought a Sony a6500 with a Sigma 16mm f1.4 lens. I loved it, it worked great, I used it, and I love Sony. You all know how Sony is. Great autofocus, S-Log2, S-Log3, easy to color grade and all that. Later on I upgraded to the a6700, which I still use up to this day. And in 2025, January, I bought the Fujifilm X-M5. I decided to try Fujifilm. Boy, was I surprised. You know how Fujifilm is. Everyone talks about Fujifilm colors, film simulation, recipes, and all of them good things, the retro style. But I was in for a surprise when I got my first Fujifilm. The X-M5 was cheap, it was affordable. I was gonna get the X100 but I couldn't afford it. It was around 1,600, and the X-M5 was just released a few months prior for around £900. And the first thing that I observed was the camera came with a manual in the box. If you're a Sony user, in the past few years, Sony cameras don't come with manuals anymore. Everything is so digital. And Fujifilm was still true to the art of including user manuals, paper, in a box. I was impressed. I love that. That was the first thing that made me know I was in for something different. And then the community. I went online to register on Facebook forums and groups and all these things. When you search for something online, and I was so quick to realize that the Fujifilm community far surpasses the Sony fan base or community on social media. Now, don't get me wrong, I understand there's loads of Sony users. There's probably more Sony users in the world than Fujifilm. However, if you own a Fujifilm, it's like you're in a cult. It's like a whole family bond immediately encompasses you. You see, with the Sony world, there's hierarchy to it. We've got the FX6, the Burano shooters, who are like God tier. You can't chat to them, you can't tell them nothing, you don't even see these people. They're like the Illuminati. And then you got the FX6 guys. So what did I say? Burano, FX9, then you've got the FX6 guys who are, you know, OGs, they know what they're doing, they got big gigs and that. And then you come down to the FX3 guys, so it's like, it's the Mecca, it's everyone's dream camera. It's my dream camera as well, the Sony FX3. Those are the guys shooting the weddings, the sport events. They've got money, they're probably driving sports cars. Those are the top dogs, you know, the FX3 guys. And then you come down to the next stage around the A7 IV users, the A7C users. Those are the guys who are very true to their arts. They're hardworking people. They know the arts of photography and videography. And they're probably making money as well. They are making money, but not enough to upgrade to the A7R5s or the FX3s or the A1s and A9s. That's a different hierarchy as well. And the A7 IV users know that they're in a different league from the A1s and the A9 users and the FX3 and the FX6 users. And then comes to the next stage, the peasants like myself, the A6700 users, the ZV-E1 users, ZV-E10. You know, at that level, you know you're a Sony user, but you really can't speak everywhere. Because in the Sony community, they'll tell you the crop sensor is not crop sensor. You need to go full frame. If you're trying to be professional, you gotta go full frame. So you're just there, just managing your life, trying to make the best out of what you've got while looking up to the higher boys and looking up to the bigger cameras, knowing someday I'm gonna get my FX3 and then everything will be all right. Bro, it's not the same on Fujifilm. If you get a Fujifilm camera, immediately you're accepted into the family. From the X-H2S users to the X Pro 1 users, they're all one. I've got the Fujifilm X-M5. It's a small little camera, compact, really nice features, lacking a few things here and there. But nobody talks about, they don't even care. From the GFX users, they're all the same. Everyone loves you. Everyone tells you it's the same tips, it's the same information. They're just talking about lenses. And Fujifilm is the first camera that I've had with a really nice kit lens. This Fujifilm came with a 15 to 45mm kit lens, the X-M5. And immediately with my Sony mind, I thought, yeah, kit lenses are not really nice. You know, the aperture is a variable aperture. The glass is really not good quality, but I was surprised. The kit lens that came with the Fujifilm X-M5 was amazing. I still use it up to this day. I'm thinking of moving from the 15-45 to the 18-55, which is still a kit lens, but the build quality is amazing. The autofocus is in sync. The glass it's just good. It's just good. And the next thing that surprised me as a Sony user coming to Fujifilm was the menu system. You see, depending on what Sony camera you have, you will hear all sorts of horror stories about Sony menu system not being good, not being nice, not being user-friendly, from the first generation to the second generation where there's colors. Now, I mean, personally, I'm not the kind of person to say the menu system is trash. It's just different. You get to learn, you get to understand it. But the menu system on the Fujifilm, I believe if the Sonys were like that, people wouldn't complain. It is deep, it is nuanced, but it's just a different ball game altogether, and it puts certain things in certain positions and categories that you understand, or photo, video, you know. There's highlights, you can adjust highlights and shadows and sharpness and clarity, and all these things that Sony doesn't offer. And little wonder how recipes are built with all this access that Fujifilm gives you to their colors. And then again, another thing that is very, very different with the Fujifilm system that really shocked me as a Sony user was the way the delete function works. So as a Sony user, when you hit the delete button on your Sony camera after taking a picture, it asks you to confirm or cancel. If you cancel, that's it. If you confirm, the picture is gone. And after that one, you have to hit the delete button again. So for every picture that you want to delete on Sony, you have to hit the delete button. You can change the setting to be delete twice and it goes, or delete and confirm, or delete and cancel. Meanwhile, on Fujifilm, it's a different story. When you hit the delete button, it asks you if you want to delete that frame, that's the image you're looking at, or you want to delete marked images, if you want to select and delete. And the third option it gives you is if you want to delete all frames. Why would you give me the option to delete all frames from the preview screen? That's wicked, because when first time I clicked on it and it said delete this frame, I'm careful. I'm a careful person. I said yes. Instinctively, my Sony mind told me, yo, now you're done with that. So you can zoom into the next picture. And on pressing the joystick in, guess what happened? I delete the next picture again. The thing with Fujifilm is when you hit the delete button, you are in delete mode. You're in deletion mode till you leave the mode. You have to delete yes, yes, no, till you leave. So if you're not careful, if you're not a person who reads and pays attention, you might mistakenly delete a good shot that you just took. Let's say you took 2, 3, and you're trying to delete number 3 and leave number 2 and number 1. When you delete number 3 and you don't press cancel and you press OK again, number 2 is gone. And you already know when you delete pictures from SD cards, you cannot get them back. So that delete process on Fujifilm, you really need to pay attention and be careful. If not, you might be fucked. The next thing that surprised me with the Fujifilm was the colors. I don't know how to say this to you, but on Sony, we've got creative looks. We've got creative looks that are just there. I've tried the creative looks a couple of times, but I'm not gonna lie, I didn't really like them. They didn't really make sense to me. The creative looks were just, yeah, it's fine, but it ain't all that. But with the Sony, the film simulations and the way the JPEGs work, Sony has something called dynamic range, DR. What the dynamic range does for you is there's 100, there's 200, and there's 400. When you leave it at 100, it's the way your camera should behave. Every other camera should behave. When you keep it at 200, it's like 50% of this action. And when you keep it at 400, that DR 400, it's 100% of this action. Now, this action is the Fujifilm magic of dynamic range optimization. So it takes a picture, if it's in like a dark environment, it raises the shadows and reduces the highlights. That's something that you probably want to do in post, in Lightroom, in RAW or whatever. But if you're taking JPEG photos and you have the dynamic range set to 400. It does its best to make sure that you can see all the detail and your camera can capture as much dynamic range as possible. Now, with features like that, shooting JPEGs and using the film recipes make you have really decent and really good looking photos straight from your camera. And that's why you see people from the Fujifilm community post pictures and say SOOC, straight out of camera. The colors on Fujifilm are next level, I would say. I mean, I've seen really good stuff from Leica and them, but Fujifilm, in my opinion, renders colors better than Sony. And if I didn't experience it myself, I probably would think anyone saying it is just hyping up their own camera system. But it is true. Fuji colors are top tier. Another thing that really surprised me moving from Sony to Fujifilm, not really moving though, but adding Fujifilm to my line of cameras, to my brand of cameras that I shoot, was the way Fujifilm handles ISO. So high ISO in low light environments introduces noise. We already know that. And with Sony, if you're shooting high ISOs like 12,800 at night or in dark environments, towards the dark parts of the image, you can see the noise, the image, the digital noise with little colors, and it's just not pleasing. And it's something you can get rid of in post. If you're in Lightroom, you can denoise and it really works. However, with Fujifilm, I realized the way the ISO performance is, the way high ISO treats noise, is in a pleasing manner. The high ISO noise from Fujifilm cameras look like grain. They don't really look like noise. I can shoot 12,800 and it looks good, and I'm happy with the way it is. Fujifilm has a noise setting in the camera. You can turn it on or off, but even if it's off and you shoot really high ISO, the ISO noise looks like grain, and I really like it. Ever since I got this camera, I have not really been bothering shooting low ISO. I shoot aperture priority most of the time, so it picks the ISO and I pick the aperture. The camera picks the shutter speed as well. So yeah, the ISO handling on Fujifilm cameras are very different from what Sony does. I mean, I haven't shot on certain high-spec Sonys like the A7R5s to know how the ISO performance is. I do know the S series, the Sony A7, like the A7S, the FX3, and whatever has S on it, does well with sensitivity. The S is for sensitivity, and the A7Rs are for resolution. So I haven't played with them cameras. I've just used the regular ones, the A7 IV, the A7C, the A6700. But I really do know that high ISO on Fujifilm is very pleasing. I wouldn't expect that from this 900-pound camera. To get performance as good as this on Sony, you would probably go over £1,000 or dollars, depending on where you live. And then comes the X app. Fujifilm has an application that you can transfer photos from your camera to your mobile phone over Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Sony has apps like that, but if you transfer those images, they will be compressed and it's not as fluid as the Fujifilm ones. And you wouldn't even want to do it on your Sony anyways, because half the time you're shooting RAWs. If you're taking pictures on your Sony, they might be RAWs. They will definitely be RAW photos because you want to edit them in post and do all these things. So the app is not even as intuitive. With Fujifilm, the X app works with all Fujifilm cameras. With Sony, there's different apps for different camera models. You're not even allowed with your A6700 to use certain applications made by Sony for Sony cameras. So you get a Sony app and you see supported devices. You see the FX6, FX3, A7S3 and ZVE1. It's like the whole Sony world is just split apart to different categories and the hierarchy is just mad. So if you're not there, you know you're not that guy. If you don't have the right camera, you know you're not that guy. Fuji, different. The prestige on Fujifilm, if you have a Fujifilm camera, you know you have a vintage looking camera with modern internals. It's a modern day camera with old school vibes. It's prestigious. It's like owning a Porsche. You know, you have a functional thing. It's got the new technology, but it's still respectable. They're not trying to innovate the style to go digitalized to a degree where it's like the cameras look so different. When you see a Fujifilm camera, you can tell it's a Fujifilm camera, from the dials to the leather, to whatever it is that's the accessories. It just looks like Fujifilm. When you buy a Sony, you know you're buying a tool, and it does very well in certain areas, depending on the camera that you have, like the ones for the low light performance, the ones, all Sony cameras have really great autofocus. However, there are Sony cameras that you have and you really don't feel among, you really don't feel like you belong, like you've got the real thing, the real deal. You still have that sense of, I need to upgrade. But with Fujifilm, you don't feel like that. There's prestige in Fujifilm cameras. When you take a Fujifilm camera out, it just turns heads. People look at them. Look at the X100VI, for instance, the X100 series. People love that camera. It looks good. It's a thing where even when these cameras get released, the XM5 is still being back ordered. People placed orders on this thing and haven't received it for many months. You see, so Fujifilm is a prestigious camera. I didn't really see it like that until I owned one. These are just my thoughts anyways. You might think different, you might think otherwise. Tell me your experience. Tell me what surprised you the most moving from another camera system to Fujifilm. These are what I experienced, and just let me know your experience in the comment section. Click on this video right here to watch a more detailed video on the XM5, and I'll see you again on the next one. Cheers.